Welcome to talks by members of the Survey and Cartography section of the National Speleological Society. These videos are intended to be how-to videos on cave survey software and other programs used by cavers in the exploration and documentation of the world beneath our feet.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Aaron. And thanks to all of you who are participating. I will not be able to see the chat, so if people have questions as they go, I'll stop in a couple of places to answer questions, but Aaron will probably have to moderate that and let me know when there is an actual question. Otherwise, I'll just kind of charge through. This talk is specifically just geared towards basic map drafting in the Canvas platform. Canvas is very similar in a lot of ways to Illustrator. It's a vector program primarily, but it does have some capabilities that are different than Illustrator. And that's different, both positive and negative for Illustrator. So I was, decided to put together this demo, just talking about the basic steps that I use for bringing in map data into this platform and basic drafting maps. And not to worry, you're not going to sit and watch me, do full digitized map for an hour, because I could think of nothing more boring, but it's just showing you kind of the basic steps and kind of the results that you can get. And then I'll show some examples of the maps at the end. I'm making some basic assumptions in this talk, is that basically that you already know how to get your line plot out of whatever software you're using, whether it's Walls or Compass or any of the other products that are out there. And also, that you've kind of got the basics of you know how to scan a chunk of your map or scan your survey notes to bring them in. So those are fairly basic assumptions, and presumably, everybody has at least made some attempt at doing digital map drafting, so kind of know those steps. So the first thing I'll kind of cover here is just sort of the basic setup that I use for getting ready to bring the data in. And you see on the screen here, I'm actually not sure if you guys can actually see my mouse. Hopefully you can. It'll make things easier.
Yes, we can.
Okay, awesome. So the basics of any cave map is setting up your page size. And you can do that when you first open up the document. It gives you a bunch of options when you're opening it, but you can also change it at any time. And if you look over here on the left, you can see it's got kind of the standard page sizes over here listed, but you can make a custom size. And as we've all figured out many times, it's like, regardless of the page you start with, you usually run off the edge in some way, shape, or form. And you can change that as you go. You can keep making your map space bigger or make it smaller depending on what you need. So in this demo, I've just got a letter size page. And then the other nice thing about Canvas is you can set up what units you're displaying. And in my case, I actually want it to be in feet, so that I'm going to be dealing in real space. Canvas does not have any limit on your page size as far as having to be one of the standards. I know that some people have had issues in Illustrator with having maps that are larger than Illustrator's maximum page size. And I have some pages, particularly some of the Lechuguilla quads, that they're 2,000 feet on an edge. So there's no limit there. And the nice thing about setting the scale here is you're going to be dealing in real coordinates. So when you're measuring stuff on your map, it's going to actually give it to you in feet or meters, whichever that you're wanting to use. And then you can customize that. It doesn't have to be the normal thing. So those are the first things I set up, are my page size and my drawing scale. And then the other thing, because of the way I bring in the data as shape files, The other thing that you have to go up here is go into the GIS tab, and just in the document settings, you just have to enable the GIS. You don't necessarily need to change all the different units here at the time. You can always change that stuff later, but to bring in the shape files, you have to have the GIS component enabled. Otherwise, it'll think you're doing just a regular drawing. And then, like just like with Illustrator, you set up your layer system, however you like to do it. Right now, I just have kind of displayed kind of the basic ones. I keep one that's just for the bitmaps, walls, structural, and I just use the term structural for the things like the pit symbols, the changes in ceiling heights, slope, that kind of thing. And then obviously details are just like floor detail. Um, Text is, I kind of separate text and notes into two different layers. The text is the stuff that's going to appear on the final map. And then the notes are just sort of cartographic notes, things that are like maybe more descriptive of what a lead looks like, or frequently it's we need to add more detail in this area, or we need to check a loop here. Things that are used kind of for making task maps go in my notes. And then explanation and border. Obviously that's just for your map explanation, and then some of the elements you need for making your final map. But to add a new layer, it's super easy. You just click on that button there, and then when you double click it, you can change the name to whatever you want it to be, and you're good. In the display order, basically the layer that's on the top appears on the top in your layering convention. So if you need to move these things around so that they're more kind of make more physical sense, you can do that too. And I'll show you that kind of at the end with an example of a cave that's got a bunch of levels to it where I've put those on different layers. Um, Obviously, if you're doing the round tripping, you'll need to still follow the regular layer naming convention that's used for the round tripping. I do not use that, so I don't have the WD underscore and then the layer name. But it's the same with illustrators. You would need to follow those layering conventions to be able to do the round tripping. And though I haven't used it, it does not seem like Canvas would have any problem, because it does import and export the SVG format, which is what's used for the round tripping. Um, the the other thing is obviously setting up your different line weights. You've got sort of pretty much unlimited ability to customize the different lines. And to make a new line weight, you would just do this, open up the new box. And it has different ways of treating lines depending on how you want them. You tend to do just kind of the basic. And then I like the rounded edges and the rounded corners. But that's all just personal preference. Um, I tend to use three basic line weights. Is the half point for my floor detail, 1 point for the structural stuff, and then 1.5 points for the walls. And that's mostly because that matches the pin weights that I used to use back in the Rapidograph pin days. The fellow old timers on this will know the joys of using the old Rapidograph pins. But sort of aesthetically, I like those pin weights, and I just choose my line weights in Canvas to kind of match. The other nice thing to have is your symbol library, and Canvas is really good at making these available. It's really easy to create your own custom symbols. Most of what you see on the screen here is kind of a combination of stuff I use in Alaska, like tundra, which you don't generally have anywhere else, and the basically the Carlsbad Caverns national park symbol set, because that's where I do a lot of the cartography. But I've got some custom ones in here too. It's really easy to add to create a symbol. Say I just want to have a circle with a line through it or something like that, as a symbol for whatever. You can just create it, group it together into one object, and then you just drag it over here into your uh, into the palette on the side, and then give it a name, and then it shows up in your list alphabetically, and then that allows you to just plop it over and over. If you kind of drag your mouse as you drop it, it changes sizes, but um, that it's really easy to do. And then you can also basically each of these symbols is kind of its own little file. So it makes it really easy if you want to share symbol sets or subsets of your symbols to to give to other people to use, and things like that. And then they're custom scalable. And then I'll show you another kind of fun feature with Canvas on the symbols a little bit later. So the basics of bringing, well, let me pause there for a second. Does anyone have any questions related to just that part? Those are kind of the first basics, but.
Do you do the same thing for like lines as well? Like if you want like a floor step line, or maybe you're going to get to that.
Repeat that. I couldn't hear you very well.
Sorry. Is it like a similar process to make a floor step line or like ceiling step line, like a custom line?
The custom lines, this is one of the areas that Canvas is not as versatile as Illustrator, as far as for making the ceiling height change lines and the lines for like pits, where you've got the brush stroke that can have those extra tick marks on it. You can accomplish it in Canvas by basically placing the tick marks as arrowheads, and then the arrowheads will show up at the basically are the nodes of the line that you're making. I just draw those tick marks myself manually, which I'll show you when we get to that part of it. But to the best of my knowledge, it does not have that level of customizable brush stroke that Illustrator does.
And then for also the symbols, can you like rotate them easily? Like if you add like one of your, like your bedrock symbol or something, can you like drag it in and like rotate it, I guess?
Yeah. I'll zoom in on the bedrock symbol. So, it comes in as you have it drawn. All you have to do is click it a second time, and then you can grab this little handle and turn it
Okay, yeah.
whatever angle you want. If you want that to be a precise one, you can do the rotate command, and then that gives you an option to put an exact angle on it. You can get to the same thing by hitting Control R, but I'm trying to be disciplined and not use all the keyboard shortcuts for all these things so that you can actually follow what I'm doing. So trying to make it a reasonable demo. Okay, so if there's nothing else, I'll now kind of do the basics of bringing in the line plots. So I use shape files to bring in the line plots, but you can use SVG or any other number of kind of vector formats. I mean, obviously, you can also just drop in bitmaps as well, but that's sort of kind of like the least advisable way of doing it, because that frequently ends up with some scaling issues. So to bring in my shape files, I just go up here to GIS and import, and then I'll go to that, and here at the bottom, I'll select shapefile, and this kind of gives you the list of the basic files, at least in this mode, that Canvas lets you bring in. In this case, I'm bringing in the surveys and the stations as two separate files. And you can, however many shape files you have, you can bring them in all at once. And then it'll bring up the layer list. First thing I do is take care of the projection. And I know that I'm bringing these in linear units out of Compass, and that the original units are in feet. And then I don't need to select the rest of them. And then I've got this click that says use it for all the files. So I only have to change the projection in one of them. And then the properties, you can change each one. Say instead of red, I want it to be a circle, and it's defaulting to 5 point. And yeah, I really want something that's more like 3 point. Sort of, that just depends on kind of how big of a cave you're dealing with, and how zoomed in you're going to be. And then blue is fine for the line, and then just hit OK. And you notice that it plotted it way up here, and that's because Canvas sees this as the origin. So I can just drag this back into the map space. And because I brought in two different layers, the stations and the surveys, I just want to select across all the visible layers and drag those into my work area. And then I always try to make sure that I turn that back off, because you can start grabbing things you didn't really mean to. So now I've got the basic line plot in there. I also don't like, this long name here. So I'm just going to change that to stations. If I can type right. And that one is surveys. And then, of course, I want to put the station labels on there too. So now I just go to the stations layer, make sure it's the active one, go to the GIS tab again, and label by property. So in this case, the property is station, and that's the station name. Then you've got control over the font, the color. I'll just leave all that as default. I always like putting the station names on its own separate layer, just so that I can turn them on and off as I need. Particularly when I'm digitizing, I don't like having the station name in the way. And you just hit OK. So they're there, and it automatically generates that new layer name, which now I want to rename. Station name or station label. So that way I've got that set on there. So then the next step is bringing in the bitmap. Obviously, you can use either like an individual sketch to do that. You can bring it in, or if you've got like the whole map of a separate cave, of the cave drawn already, and like a pencil drawing, you're just trying to bring it in. You can scan the whole thing and bring it in and start morphing it from there. In this case, I know that my original survey data are actually in a PDF file. So instead of dropping the PDF and all of its associated layers right in, what I'll just do is I'll open up the PDF file so I can just grab the sketch that I want. And Canvas does read and write PDF perfectly fine. Go back here, and then I made it easy by only having the one sketch in here. So it'll bring that in, and it will preserve the PDF layers and stuff if it's in there as such. So this brings in the survey book basically from that, and this is at a spider cave. And then I'll just go to the sketch that I wanted, and just click on it, and then I just copy and paste it back in. So I'm doing the Control C and then Control V for, I said I wasn't going to use the keyboard shortcuts, and then I did it anyway. Okay, and then I paste that onto my bitmap layer. So you see here, north is actually now off to the left. So it's in at the, actually came in at the wrong scale, but that's just because I have the scale set wrong on the PDF. So first thing I'll do is actually change the scale. And that is, I know the keyboard shortcut, I'm trying to remember the, yeah, there it is. So it's F8 is the normal one. And this actually came in at too high of a scale. So I'll scale it back to where it's supposed to be. And now I'll rotate it. And again, I'm going to do kind of two different rotations. I'll kind of do the initial one of 90. But that also does not take into account the declination. So I will, you know, flip it around again. Again, I'll just do the rotation there. And when you're doing the images, you want to hard rotate it, because otherwise it's actually just remembering its original location. And I know in this case, the declination is basically 7.5. It's not that important that you get that exact, but it does help with the morphing a little bit later. So now I've got the plot in there, just happen to have kind of lined it up a little bit. Obviously, kind of at each of these stages, it's always good to save. I'm sure all of us who've done this have gotten well into a digitizing project and ended up, you know, losing a bunch of work because we didn't save at each step. But for this demo, I'm not going to bother having you wait for it to save. So now what the next step is actually morphing the sketch to the line plot. So the way you do that, I'm just zooming in so I can actually see it. In this case, I'll select across the visible layers. I'm going to grab the bitmap, and then I'm also going to select the line plot, because that's what I want to morph it to. And to select multiple things, it's like a lot of the programs, you just hold the shift key down and click on it. So now you can see I've got two objects selected, and then I just go to the image warp, and then just point to point. So that changed it into this different mode. And then you can just go through and basically you click on the point that's on the bitmap, and then on the line plot, you know, you can do this with or without the station labels turned on. You know, because obviously you see it kind of can, you know, obscure it a little bit. But you just go through and you do that on all the points. If you're trying to digitize a whole like giant map that you've already produced at some other time, it is actually possible to have too many points, because the processing, because it's basically building a triangular network, you can kind of overwhelm the math capabilities of some of the programs. Oh, I think I actually just did that backwards here. So if you make a mistake, you can just select it and then hit the delete button. It's always good to make a mistake during the demo so you can show how you can backtrack. I just registered them to the wrong points. So I won't go through and do absolutely every point here, but just kind of give you a feel for it. You know, and then you can also see how you end up with different choices in your morphing algorithm too. If you're like really want to get into the weeds on some of the different ways that you can do the morphing, you've got mostly full control over what kind of a algorithm it's using for doing the morphing. And I'll just call this, close enough for the pseudo government work here. So once you've got all the points that you want, you then, the pixel resampling, you can have it on the different algorithms, or the nearest neighbor, bilinear, biquadratic, bicubic, polynomial, and then automatic. And the automatic is it just sort of looks at your distribution of points and picks which method is going to give the best fit. I generally use it on automatic. You do end up with a problem if you're in a super long straight passage, say a lava tube, or just a straight joint controlled passage where you don't have anything off to the sides, because this is building on triangles. If you've got everything in a straight line, it can't really have reasonable triangles, and you will end up with like a very weird looking morph. If that happens, then you can usually take care of it with using the nearest neighbor, because then all it's doing is some scaling and some lateral shifting and not trying to build the triangles. Or you end up having to kind of do it the old-fashioned way of sliding your text around. So, that's sort of a known feature, and that's something that's not unique to Canvas, but for any morphing program. So then I hit morph, and you see it's locked the stuff in. I'll go ahead and turn the station names off. And obviously that's dependent on how well you've picked your points. I've got some fairly fat points there. The nice thing is that if you just say, oh, I need a couple more points to make this work, like you see I left these out, and so it's kind of hanging. Even if you've exited, if you select those same two objects again and haven't moved them, you can do that image warp command, and all the points that you already did will still be in there, and then you can add more to it. The other thing is your original bitmap is actually not affected. It leaves the old one, so it's sitting here hiding behind in its original location. So if you don't like the way you did it, you can delete it, and it's not affected your original map. So then the next step is just sort of your basic digitizing. Just my personal preference is to start with the walls digitizing. So you just select your pin weights. There's kind of two different tools you can use. You've got kind of this regular curve tool, which basically every time you click the button, it makes a vertex. The other one is the freehand tool, and that's kind of more of the smooth as you go drawing tool. This actually generates a lot more points. You see this one, just that little curve was 148 points, whereas this one was 13. So in a small cave, that doesn't matter, but in a larger cave, that will matter a lot. And frequently what I'll do is when I'm done drafting either the cave or a section of cave, I will go back in on some of the ones that I did the freehand and reduce the points, which you can do under this path command. You can say reduce points, and you can tell it to be real tight with its reduction, so it really looks the same. So now it's down to a whopping 110 points. You can play with this a lot, and usually kind of its default setting kind of in here smooths it out a little bit, and now I've cut it in half. So it doesn't look really any different, but it's half the number of points. And in a big cave, that makes a difference in how big your resulting file is going to be. So you would just go through and digitize all the walls. I'll just pop over to kind of the one where I've already done it. So there's the bitmap, and here's where I digitized the walls. All the little pillars and everything like that. Um, and then the next is the structural detail, which I have it. I do it the 1 point, and it's the same kind of deal. Depending on how far you want to zoom in. I'm a close zoomer. Um, so you click these in, and like I said, I manually put the tick marks in there. And in Canvas, anytime you choose a tool, if you hit the shift key and hold it, it retains the tool. So like if I'm doing lots of these structural things, I'll click along, and then you double click to finish that one. And then you still have it selected, so you can just keep going with your digitizing. Um, and then even when you switch tools, it still retains it. I tend to, just put the tick marks in myself. Um, that way I've actually got more control over them. If you're really picky and want them all to be the exact same length, most people can eyeball them to be pretty much the same length. And I'm obviously doing kind of quick and dirty in here. And then when you're doing kind of the ceiling height changes, you can draw each of those lines individually, but what I tend to do is I'll draw the whole line, and then I'll choose one of the dash options, and you have full control over the spacing and character of the dashes. So I'll usually find one that kind of looks the way I want it, and then just add the tick marks manually in there. And you can make them as close or as wide as you want. And just with kind of customizing the different lines that you have. And generally for me, it'll be variable how far I want these spaces apart, depending on the sort of eventual map scale that I use, and the just sort of the aesthetics of that particular area. Obviously, in a really small, um, you know, passage, like frequently say if there was a ceiling height change there, you would just, have one kind of go across the whole passage. And then again, when that's done, you end up having all those features in there. You can start seeing it come together, and then the the next step is the floor detail. Um, I, I'm a little OCD, so there's like a certain pattern that I use. I tend to want to do kind of the breakdown and flowstone first. And for the small breakdown, I almost always use the freehand tool. Um, Oops, I forgot to change the line weight to the 0.5. So I'll use the freehand tool for that, especially if I'm dealing with drawing lots of breakdown. Um, I prefer the smooth motion of drawing it that way and then reducing the points later. But that's primarily because I have carpal tunnel syndrome, and when I'm doing hours of drafting, the fewer clicks I can get away with, the better. Um, so I'll draw all those, and then like over here, we've got a little bit of flowstone, and for the flowstone, I don't use brush strokes for the flowstone or for any of the floor detail. I put every symbol in manually, and that's just a personal preference because I think a lot of the pattern fills and stuff look too computery. So this is just the arc 3-point tool. So all your circle variations are in here, but that lets me just go click on one part, one of the others, and then I can just go through and make my little flowstone symbols, and do it that way. That's sort of the fastest way I found to do the flowstone symbol. I don't use it like one out of the symbol library because obviously sometimes you want these hooked together when you're looking at a big slope as opposed to something that's a mix of flowstone and then this is popcorn. So for the symbols, obviously you've got this nice pick list of things. So like I said, we got some popcorn there. So I'll go down, and again, it's alphabetical. I've got two versions of the popcorn, like regular size and small, just for the for the smaller passages, which there's a lot of in this particular cave. And then you can either there's kind of a couple different ways you can do it. You can either go one at a time and click, and then here's kind of the small version. You can just shrink this down, but if you're having to do a lot of it, it's just more time consuming to click on each one and kind of change its size to the way you want it and stuff. So I just have a small version and a large version of some of these symbols. The trick that's actually not in the Canvas documentation is it used to be you could press the Shift key, click on your symbol, and then it would like be persistent. They took that feature away, but if you click on any of these things, like I'll click on the circle and I'll hold down the Shift key to retain the tool. If I then go over and click on the symbol, it will then let me just put them in wherever I want. So it's kind of an undocumented trick that I learned after using this for a while when they took away some of my features. And then obviously you would do that with all of your different symbols. So we've got some gypsum here, and then I just have a sand symbol, which is basically just a really small circle. And you can change all these to whatever is right for the scale you're using. This is at 20 feet to the inch, and this passage is fairly small. This is only like 2 feet wide here, so you can do that. The one other kind of nice feature of Canvas is say we'll just say hypothetically the national park you're working with decides they're changing the symbols of everything. We know that would never ever happen, but when it if and when it does, there's a nice feature is say they change the gypsum symbol, so I can click on my gypsum symbol and then click this button that says the same symbol. So now across the whole map it'll choose all those symbols and say I'm like, okay, they now want it to be just this X. So I can then click on this in here, and then this button is the replace button. So it instantly will replace every instance of that symbol at whatever scale I drew it at with the new symbol. So it's a way for when those things change, or when or even when you decide that you wanted to use a different symbol, that you can do that pretty rapidly without having to tediously go through your whole map and manually go through and do that. The one warning is if for whatever reason, if you click on one of these and you ungroup it, because obviously this is a group of things. Once you ungroup it, it no longer sees that as your symbol. It sees that as a bunch of lines, so that replace function will not work. I've made that mistake before when I've kind of ungrouped things like one level too much, and then for some reason it took me a while to figure out what was going on, but I had actually ungrouped the individual symbols. So I'll pop back over here to the kind of completed menu version here, and turn on the details. I'll go ahead and turn off the bitmap so you can kind of see. So then you're starting to to look at what's more of kind of like a finished map, or at least of that particular segment. So you see I've dropped the bedrock symbols in and then turn them at the angles that I want them to be. I've got the different, this is, a column flowstone. So that's all digitized. And then the next step is just putting in the, your ceiling heights and cross sections, which I tend to lump into the same layer, which I haven't actually even created on this one yet. And I'll usually just call it heights and sections. You can keep those separate. It just depends on your personal preference. And then those are just, a text. In this case, it's and I usually go with more of 10 point on this map. And then to do the circle, I make the circles 1 point. Obviously, this is all personal preference. And then if you want it to be a perfect circle, as you're dragging your circle out, if you hold the shift key, it keeps it so that it's a perfect circle. And it'll do the same thing with a rectangle. It'll make sure that that's right. And then, so now all I do is this is sort of gives me kind of the feature alignment. I'll click on this double X, and that makes it sure that they line up horizontally and vertically together, so they're centered on each other. And then I'll group those together. And then the nice thing, so I'll just make a copy of this. So I'm just going Control C, Control V to make another copy. So over here, I've got a 2-foot ceiling height. You do not have to ungroup that symbol to edit the text. If you just go to text and go across your symbol, you can just immediately change that to a 2. It still stays together as a group. And it doesn't matter if it's in a circle or a square for pit symbols. That'll always be the case, is you can edit the text even if it's grouped into something else, which is a nice little shortcut feature that's nice to have. And then, for your cross sections, it's the sort of the same thing. You can either rotate your bitmap back to where these are horizontal, or you can just digitize around them as they are. So I'll go to my heights and section. I do use different line weights. I use the same kind of wall, floor, and ceiling ones. Obviously, this is a really small passage, so you can only get pretty general. So I'll digitize this up as best I can. At this scale, this is obviously not a great example because it's so small of a thing, but I'll put in my flowstone, which did not. There we go. Always remembering to so, or however you like to draw those, and then I'll just group them together, and then you can either rotate using that Control R command, or just rotate it so it's back to horizontal. And then you can put in your lines there. Obviously, generally you want your cross sections viewed kind of up on your map. So, so this one would technically be backwards if I make my tick mark. Let me change it to the 1 point. Obviously, I'm not being nearly as precise as I would be for real. So you can just go here and then just do the effects and then flip it horizontally. So now it's in the correct viewing location. So again, you would just do that for all of your heights and sections. You see here where I've actually got them put in their correct locations. And then you would add the text and stuff as you would need it. One thing that comes up is as you're going along, it's like, oh well, I have I really want a ceiling height here, or I want a ceiling height here, and you either have to go and look at your running profile, or you can go and back into the cave data to look at it. But because we've brought this information in GIS, what we can also do is just select the stations, because I want to get information on the station. Go to the GIS and go to the object properties, and this is just like any GIS system would be. So this is like using the information tool in ArcGIS. I can click on it, and then here I've got my the coordinates for the station, and then my left, right, up, downs. So I can take the up, down, and say, okay, this is 2.7. So this is like a 3-foot ceiling height. I can add one in here. So you can actually get right down to the data for that. The other thing that lets you do is when you're in this environment, you're going to want to also put in occasional elevations. So this compass Z is the actual elevation relative to datum. So you can do your elevations the same way, above or below datum, without having to go back and look at the plot and turn on the elevations and everything. So it's a really nice feature that you can just do all this inside Canvas. The other thing I use that feature for is the Z, is when you've got your lines going above and below each other, knowing which passage is on top and which one is below without having to go back or have the actual have compass open or walls open to see that relationship. So it definitely saves some back and forth time on doing that. And then I'll go ahead and turn off the stations. And so at that point, then you're really just adding kind of your other map elements. I'll zoom back out so it kind of looks like what your map would be. Obviously, this is way more of an explanation than you need for this. This is just the one that I use for my Lechuguilla quad. So obviously, I would just take off all the features that weren't relevant. The different text that you'd have in here, your scale and north arrows. You can just bring those in. And I don't think I've got any notes actually in this one. So then you're basically kind of at your basic map that's here. Obviously, the shapefile stuff won't is not useful for the profiles, because this is not a 3-dimensional viewing program of the shape files. So you can't like flip it 90 degrees and get a profile. The profiles you'll still have to bring in separately. And in my case, I bring them in as DXF. And I'll just kind of show you real quickly how I do that. So I'm bringing in the file that I've already created in Compass. So I'm not going to go through that step. I'm assuming everyone knows how to get their line plots out. In this case, I'm just pulled it out from a different cave. In this case, I'm not setting up a separate page or everything yet. I'll do that after I bring in the profile. So bring that in, and you get these import options, and this is both for the DWG and DXF files, the AutoCAD ones. The source unit, I know that it's in feet, so I'm going to already tell it feet. The drawing scale, I'm like, okay, well, I actually want this to be 20 feet to the inch to map. And because both the DWG and DXF are kind of aware of their scale, it just sort of will let you bring it in that way. And then you can choose your paper size. Again, just depending on how big of a map that you're bringing in, but it's something you can change later. You're not like locked into this. And then all this other stuff you can usually leave in its default mode, because it's dealing with some of the AutoCAD hatches and stuff like that and the different layers in AutoCAD. But in this case, all I'm doing is bringing in a plot. It'll come up with this layout. That's not really relevant. And then you've got your profile map. The one thing I always do, if I've got the option, is to tell it to bring in the scale bar. That way I can double check, and usually the easiest way is to just sort of draw one of these straight lines across, and then I can look up above in the length field up here, and that actually tells me what the length of that particular line is. So it's like, great, they matched, they're 20 feet. That means I actually brought it in at the right scale and I didn't end up with any artifacts. And then you can digitize around your profile the same way that you do do the plan. And I won't bother saving that. The one other thing that's kind of important to do, you remember when I brought in this line plot, that it plotted it like way off here on the edge. So say I do a bunch more surveying in this particular cave, I don't want to have to keep dragging that and lining it up every single time. So what you can actually do in this GIS window is you can actually choose the reference point. You're basically saying, say you're starting at the entrance with A1, you can actually say, okay, I want A1, and I'll just, for this illustration, just click here is saying that that's the first one. So it's linear units. So this is telling me where it sits in the universe right now. But what I want this to be is 0 and 0. So anytime I bring in a new plot, that station A1 is always going to land on that spot. And then I forgot to change one thing. Is saying not to move it. It's always good to make that mistake during the demo so that so that when somebody else makes that mistake in real life, they can do it. So we don't want it to preserve the positions, because that's going to preserve all those original XYs. We want to reset the whole map to that reference point. And then now it's there. And then you can see from the coordinates down here that is now my 0, 0, 0 point. So, if you're doing kind of a one-off map, that doesn't make much of a difference. But if you're working on update after update after update on project maps, that's an important feature. So there's some more advanced stuff that I can go into, but I was going to pause here and see if anyone had any questions.
Okay. Go ahead.
I have a question. For the warping that you showed off, I saw that there was like multiple options. There's like options. There's like curves, and there was also like a line for the warping part. And I was just curious if like you've played around with those different tools at all, if you know anything about them.
Yeah, basically, you can go point to point, or say you have like a long curved line that you want to morph a bitmap to. You can click on that line and then on your bitmap, and it will kind of morph it to fit that curve or whatever. I've never used that as for anything for cave drawing. I've done it for other like illustrations and graphics that I've done. So it kind of behaves just sort of like, when you want your text to appear along a curve, you can do the same thing with a bitmap. So I haven't played with it a lot, but it is one of the options that you can use.
For the line option, I guess like it's just a single line. Like you can't have like multiple lines, like the survey station line.
That's correct.
Okay, so it doesn't help you.
No. The point to point is definitely the way to go for the cave map stuff.
Okay, cool.
I have a question, Paul. And this goes back a little ways in your presentation, but I think it would be good for people to know, do you try to draw at a consistent zoom factor, or do you find yourself always moving in and out at different numbers, and how does that impact the distribution of your floor detail?
I tend to be zoomed at a pretty high scale. I mean, we've had like these little fun discussions both at the salon judging and on the Facebook page of people talking about what level they go at. For me, it's sort of whatever I think is reasonable. You see here, I'm at 1,000%, and that's actually kind of too far away for me. So on floor detail, I tend to be zoomed in a lot. You know, see here, like I'm at 5,000% for my floor detail. For walls, I think I'm probably usually more like in the 2,000 range. Yeah, this is by eyeball. So this would be kind of be my zoom when I'm doing the walls, because I find that kind of helps me capture the curves and stuff a little bit better. But you know, obviously it depends on the scale you're using and kind of how jagged you want your walls to look in the final. You know, if you're obviously if you're sketching it, or if your final map is you know like 50 feet to the inch or something, you know, big like that, capturing every little wiggle in your walls, even if your sketch was done at 20 feet to the inch, is not going to be all that useful to you, because you're never going to see those variations. So you can save yourself some clicks. And I do want to point out that it is perfectly doable to do this digitizing stuff on the drafting tablets. I actually do have one of the Huion drafting tablets so that I can do cave cartography while I'm like watching TV or something. And there's no problems with the interface. Unfortunately, you do still have to kind of have the laptop nearby so that you can hit things like the shift key and the delete button and things like that, because it's faster than finding the equivalent command on the screen.
Thanks. I think that's something that people struggle with, is trying to find the right zoom factor and how often they print their maps out on paper to see what they actually look like, if the floor detail density is you know, pleasing to the eye and so forth. The second question that I had was, is it possible to, so at the very outset, you moved the line plot onto the page. Is it possible to do the reverse? Can you leave the line plot where it is and move the page to the line plot?
Unfortunately, no.
Okay.
Which is very annoying. It's actually one of those things that I've been trying to convince Canvas of for a long time, and they're like, "Well, why would you want to do that? You can just grab and move everything." And I'm like, "Trust me, there's a reason." You know, because these maps can get pretty big, and you know, trying to drag and move everything without it grouping them together and everything does, you know, is a bit of a pain. But there's just not any way of doing it, and sometimes that happens when you change your page size too, is that it won't necessarily, you can't tell it which side of your page you want it to go. It's always going to go like the right side and the bottom. So you do end up, if you change page sizes, you probably end up having to move stuff again and then reset your datum point.
Okay, thanks.
I have one more question. Does Canvas support like importing georeferenced raster images like a GeoTIFF?
Yep, and it preserves all the geotagging information. So because this is actually meant to be kind of a, well, I won't say poor man's GIS, because it's still, well, it's certainly cheaper than ArcGIS. You know, not as powerful, but yeah, it'll take the georeferenced TIFFs and the georeferenced JPEGs, as well as the shape files. And again, you have to make sure the GIS is active, but I'll just pop this open for the different formats that it'll take. So you can go online and see absolutely everything that it'll do. But you can see it really will let you bring in a lot of these different formats, including, I think it'll actually bring in KML. Yeah, so you can read and write KML files. So if you want to do something here and then drop it into Google Earth, you can do it. And you can take the stuff out of Canvas and bring it into ArcGIS if you want your cave map, the walls and everything to show up in there. There's a couple steps you need to take to make it work well, particularly with the symbols, because you basically have to turn those into kind of grouped objects because it doesn't recognize the symbols. But it's actually not that onerous to do. I won't go into that here because this is supposed to be kind of the basics, but yeah, it will keep all that geographical information in when you bring in the geotiffs.
Cool. And we'll only import like I guess like the RGB layers or dimensions.
I'm not sure what its limitations are. I think when you bring in like your regular not sort of bitmap, but georeferenced bitmap. I think the layers that show up are the RGB, but I've only done that, but I think that's just because that's the only information that those have had. I've not brought in any that have like the near IR or any of that other stuff in it. So you'd kind of have to play with it to see if it really works for you.
Cool, thanks.
Sure. All right, and I just wanted to show a couple other things here. First, I'll show you kind of, this is just one little segment of Spider Cave, but I wanted to just kind of show, this is that same location in Spider, and zooming out, you can sort of see it's, it's a whole lot of cave at that scale, but you can make all that fit in. I obviously don't have all the different layers turned on. And then the other thing I wanted to just sort of show things that you can do with the different layering and everything. This is the Lecce Cave Upper Rift Quad, and you can see here this very big complicated mess of the North Rift. And in this case, like I said, we're the levels that show up here on the right are kind of stratigraphically correct. So your uppermost layer appears at the top on this, but that actually lets you kind of create a map that will let you turn on and off all these different layers. So say I'm going to find one that's remember here which ones are which. So to turn on like the Fawn Hall trace. So this is the Fawn Hall level that's colored. So I can actually turn off everything related to Fawn Hall, all of its walls, all of its details, and make it disappear, and just see the stuff that's in the layer that I want. And the nice thing is when you export this to PDF, it actually preserves all those layers. So even in the PDF version of the map, you can turn on and off the layers. So if you're actually using the PDF in the cave, which people have done fairly frequently, is you can actually go through and kind of, it's a little easier to navigate through those different cave levels by being able to turn on and off those different layers and see the leads on the different layers when stuff is all stacked up on each other. So it's got a lot of capabilities for using those layers to actually represent cave levels in a way that makes it so you can really customize the maps that you want if you're going in to push leads and stuff. And then the other kind of fun feature, and I'll be careful, this is about to look really messy. So this is turning all the stuff back on. Frequently, when you're working on some of these big project maps, you add some data and then you're just sort of looking at this spaghetti mess going, okay, now where do I need to draft this new stuff, especially if it's coming in from teams that you weren't on. You can actually query the data just like before. So in the surveys, so I can go GIS, select by property, and now that I've selected surveys, these are the different things that that you can select by. You can do spatial stuff. You can combine them. You know, this is really a logical query, and there's no limit to what you can change. So say I'm just looking like, okay, I'm done with 2020. So I want to just pick out everything where the year, whoops, equals 2020. I just want to see that. So it'll select it, and then I can, right now everything is purple. I can say, okay, well, I want to just make all these bright red, so that I know where I need to do the sketches. And then if I kind of turn off all the layers, and I'll just kind of do it the way where I know that there's a bunch of stuff here. So I won't turn them all off, but so now I can see, okay, now in red are all the things that are for 2020. So I know the stuff I need to catch up on or add to the map or correct the map really, really easily. You can also save the queries. So say you're in a place like Wind Cave where you've working with different levels and you want to have kind of every level its own color. You can basically cut and paste your survey list into that query thing so that a whole group of surveys is all going to be like upper level or upper middle or main level, and then save that query. So the next time you bring in data, you can just run that same query again. It breaks your levels out by color again. And then you can, obviously, if you're bringing a new survey, you'd have to add that survey to its appropriate query. But it's a way that you can then still kind of generate those cave level maps, just using the GIS capabilities in Canvas. So, it's not necessarily a tool that everyone is going to use, because not everyone is working in caves kind of that complex or that break themselves into layers. But having that GIS capability is really nice and for some applications. And I'm sure there's a whole bunch more that I've never done with it. But those are just kind of the examples of things that I've done using the GIS capabilities.